I'm actually a chemist by training. I live with a chronic disease myself. I live with a form of inflammatory arthritis. And so I'm really passionate about helping people with whatever condition has been thrown their way to finding different options and finding what works for them. So tonight, I'm going to share with you a bit about kind of the basics about clinical trials, just so that we're all starting in the same place and know a little bit about what these are and why people do them in the first place. The next thing I want to talk to you about is a bit about participation or even withdrawal from clinical trials. So I want to kind of dispel the myth that once you are in a trial, you have to stay in a trial or you can't change your mind. So being in a trial is a volunteer-based thing, and you can change your mind at any time about your participation. So I just want to be really clear about some of that. And lastly, we're going to talk about some of the ways you might find a trial if you're interested in that, and maybe some of the things you might ask about trials that you are interested in as well. So to start off with, I'm part of an Ontario-based organization. We don't do clinical trials ourselves, but we help improve the environment in Ontario to do trials. And we're primarily funded by the provincial government of Ontario. Even though I'm in Ontario and work for an Ontario-based organization, clinical trials are regulated at a federal level by Health Canada. So anything that I'm going to talk to you tonight about is going to be applicable no matter where you are in Canada. And so CTO is really about helping people who do trials to streamline some of their processes. It's about the work that I do, engaging patients and the public better with clinical trials. And we also do a lot of promotion to bring trials to Ontario as well. So all of the information that I'm going to share with you can also be found on our website. We work with a lot of national organizations, so it's all available in English and French. And all of the information that we've developed that I'll talk to you about tonight, we have developed in collaboration with people who live with different conditions, people who have been in trials, people who have cared for people who have been in trials, and people who are just interested in trials in general. So we haven't created this information in a vacuum. It's all evidence-based, but we've presented it in a way that we think will resonate better with people looking for this kind of information. So let's start with the basics about clinical trials and what they even are to start off with. So it is important that in some spaces, people do participate in clinical trials because they're seeking access to different therapies that they might not otherwise have access to. But it is really important to keep in mind that trials are part of research. So they test specific health-related interventions, and intervention is just a fancy word for treatment or therapy. And we design them to answer really specific questions. And we're going to talk a little bit about how they are designed to answer specific questions. So some of those questions might be, is the treatment safe? Does the treatment cure a condition, or maybe it just improves your quality of life as someone living with a condition? Maybe it performs better than the current treatments that are out there. And so those are all things that trials can actually answer. And oftentimes, I think, and we're going to talk about clinical trials for drugs, but just a note that clinical trials can be used to study a lot of different things. So they can be used to study things like devices, so pacemakers, or maybe an insulin pump, different types of surgery, different types of radiation therapy, different types of diagnostic and imaging procedures, even things like diet, lifestyle, and exercise. So, I just wanted to kind of like broaden the fact that while we might often think just about drugs, there's lots of other things that we can study using clinical trials. That being said, we're going to focus tonight on the drug angle of things just to keep things simple. So why do we even do trials? Well, we do trials so that we can gather evidence about new treatments or new potential treatments. And we want to use them to see what therapies or interventions might work best in people. And different people can use the evidence from clinical trials to make different types of decisions. So, you might look at research papers and decide this is a therapy that I would like to use because I've taken a look at the data. I know it sounds really, really nerdy, but when the COVID vaccines were coming out, those were really important to me, and I dug into the trial data that was available. Policymakers will use trial data to decide what things should be covered by different formularies. Researchers and clinicians might use clinical trial data when they develop clinical guidelines, so treatment guidelines for people. Health Canada uses the evidence from clinical trials to make other decisions about trials. So there's a whole bunch of different people that can actually use the evidence that's generated by trials, and they'll use it for different reasons. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that there's these different phases of clinical trials, and we'll talk about them in the drug space. And each of these different phases is designed to answer a different question, in this case, about drugs. And the phases are designed really carefully, and the people who participate in these are watched carefully. They're often asked to provide information about themselves, sometimes samples from them, etc. So generally things start in phase 1. And we'll talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. Again, this is the first time that a drug goes into people. However, usually we know a lot about that drug before it goes into people. So there's typically many years of what's called preclinical work that's done on a drug. There may be work that's been done in cell models, in different types of animal models. And so by the time it gets to the clinic and the decision is made to take this drug into people, we have a pretty good idea of how safe it is, but we don't actually know until it goes into people. And so that's why clinical trials are done. That's why they're done in kind of like different stages as well, so we can answer questions about them, make decisions about if it's safe for those phases to continue. So phase 1 tends to be in a smaller number of people. These people are really closely monitored. Sometimes they're on site being monitored. If things move to phase 2, that's generally in a larger number of people. If things move to phase 3, an even larger amount of people. And if things move to phase 4, in Canada, this is phase 4 studies are when Health Canada has allowed this to be marketed widely. So we'll talk about each of these phases and the different questions that they answer. So phase 1, as I mentioned, first in human. This is the first time that drugs have gone into people. These are done to establish the safety of the intervention or the therapy. So that's why there's a small number of people in this, because this is the first time this drug is going to people, and we're looking at the safety of it. There's generally an idea of what the dose of the drug should be, but there are some dosing studies done here, and the side effects of the drug are really closely monitored here. Small number of people because it's such an important time in kind of the drug's lifetime. And depending on what the outcome is here, and for a number of reasons, the drug may or may not continue past phase 1 studies. So we're just going to assume with our hypothetical drug that things look good in phase 1. It's met its so-called endpoints. and whoever is funding this study has decided that they will move this into a phase 2 study. Phase 1 studies, I forgot to mention, are usually done in what's called healthy participants. So those participants usually don't have a condition. Phase 2 studies happen in people who are living with a condition for which the drug is intended. It's a larger number of participants for phase 2. And this is where we're looking to establish what's called efficacy. So does the drug do what it's supposed to do in this case, in this person? And continuing to learn more about the exact dose that should be provided, and side effects are always monitored throughout the study. There's going to be a larger number of people here because we've established the safety of the drug, and we're looking to learn more about dose and side effects. And I'm generally going through each of the phases as if they're very separate. Sometimes phases can be combined. So with really rare diseases, there's often not a lot of people that live with those diseases. And so sometimes a couple of questions might be answered by like maybe it's a phase 1-2 study, or it's a phase 2-3 study or something like that. So I'm just going to go through them in the kind of simplest forms per se. So we're going to imagine again that the so-called sponsor or whoever is funding this study looks at the phase 2 information and decides again to green light it for phase 3 because things look good. So phase 3 studies generally are done again in many more people. And here we're looking to see how long the effects of this particular drug last. And just like in the previous phases, we're looking still at the dose and the side effect information. Larger number of participants. And here you might hear phase 3 studies called RCTs, or randomized clinical trials. And these are kind of like the gold standard of drug trials. That's where you're comparing 2 or more treatments or treatment arms against each other. And the participants are randomized to one of those arms, which means exactly that they will be given one of the interventions basically by chance. And that is done to reduce the bias when people are looking at the study results. So we're going to assume here that the sponsor of the drug sees good results from the phase 3 trial. It's at this point where they can submit a whole package of information, in our case to Health Canada, and they can ask for Health Canada to approve their drug to be widely marketed in Canada. So if that's the case, and that happens, a phase 4 study is when a market is widely available. So it's available in this case to Canadians. There may be tens of thousands of people who are on this. And this is called post-marketing surveillance because this is a study that's done once the drug is marketed. And this affords the opportunity to look at the long-term side effects and the side effects in a large number of people. So there are cases of drugs where once they've been marketed, not their indication, but their dose may have changed, or side effects may have been seen, so they've been pulled from market as well. So things can change. It's not typical, but once things go into a large number of people, other things become more apparent that weren't necessarily apparent in the other parts of the clinical trials. So we're looking at a large number of participants here because unless it's a very rare disease, this drug would become available to a lot of people. So that's kind of the gist of the different phases of clinical trials for drugs. And I hope you can see how each of those phases has kind of been built to answer a different type of question about things, and how the data kind of builds on top of each other, assuming that the drug continues through. And there can be a number of reasons why things start off in the clinic and just never make it to market. Could be budget, could be results, could be a whole bunch of different things. I sometimes get asked about placebo because people get worried about maybe being randomized to a placebo, or they don't entirely know what a placebo is. And so just to be clear, a placebo is something that's inactive. So it doesn't have an effect, but it looks just like the active therapy. So if the active therapy is, a white tablet, the placebo would look the exact same. Like there would be no way to tell the difference between them. So it doesn't have any effect on the condition, or it's not intended to have any effect on the condition. And this is another thing, just like randomization, that's used to decrease bias in a study. Really important that if there's a standard of care therapy that's out there, then it would not be ethical to design a clinical trial where there's a placebo. So as an example, if there's a good standard of care therapy that's already available and a new drug was going into a phase 3 trial, the phase 3 trial might look at the new drug versus standard of care. There is very little, there wouldn't be a chance that it would be the new drug versus a placebo because there's already a standard of care that's available. And it wouldn't be ethical to take people off the standard of care to participate in that type of clinical trial. So I'm going to shift a little bit to talk a little bit about your rights and a bit about participating or withdrawing from a clinical trial. So let's talk about participating or withdrawing from a clinical trial. So there's this concept of informed consent that is a really important aspect of participating in clinical trials. And I think a lot of people think that informed consent means you sign a consent form and you're kind of done. But informed consent is actually a process. And it's a process that lasts while you're in the trial. So to start off with, it's really important for you to know that your participation in a clinical trial, if that's what you decide is right for you, is completely voluntary. That's your decision alone. People can help you make that decision, but it's up to you if you'd like to participate or not. Really important is that even if you decide to be in a trial and you start to participate, you can change your mind at any time. So at any point, you can decide that you would no longer like to participate in the study. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that might look like. And as I mentioned, consent is not just signing a consent form, that's part of it, but informed consent also means being informed throughout the study. So if new information becomes available at some point during the study team would talk to you about that. If you feel you've got questions that you need answered throughout the study, that's part of informed consent. So it's not just something that takes part when you agree to participate in the trial. The other thing to know is that if you do decide to leave a trial at any point, you can ask for any samples or any of your data that you've provided for this study to be removed from the study. And that may or may not be possible for a number of reasons, but you can certainly ask for that to be the case. And you should be provided with a reason if that's not possible. So all clinical trials will have potential benefits and risks. They will be outlined in the informed consent form and should, be something that you can ask lots of questions about until you feel satisfied that you're understanding what the potential benefits and risks may be. And just like the decision is yours to participate in a trial, the decision is also up to you to decide if the benefits of participation would potentially outweigh the risks for you. So that's not really a decision that others can make for you. And benefits and risks are really going to be different for different trials. I mentioned this concept of withdrawal or leaving a clinical trial. So again, really important to understand that no matter where you are in the process, you can change your mind and you don't have to provide anyone with your reasoning for that. That's again, totally up to you. I think it's probably human nature for people to ask you what that reason is, but you don't have to answer them about that. You are encouraged when you're making that decision to talk to the study team about any questions that you might have that help you make up your mind about withdrawal or that help you understand maybe if you have to take some tests or some physical exams before before you're formally withdrawn from the trial. And those could be for safety reasons, for example, to make sure that you're coming off treatment appropriately or to make sure that you're monitored appropriately as you leave the study. And again, just back to that point that you can certainly ask to withdraw information that you've supplied that was collected from you or samples that were collected from you, but that may or may not be possible for that to be withdrawn. So those are just some things I wanted people to understand about participating as well as leaving a study if that's a choice that you decide to make. I think the next section is about finding a trial and how you might go about doing that. We often get asked, like, how do I even find a trial? And for some of you, that might mean talking to a healthcare provider. Some disease spaces, trials are almost like a part of care, like in oncology. Many oncologists know quite a bit about trials, and it's kind of a toolkit that they have. In other areas, trials are not necessarily kind of offered as part of treatment per se. So your healthcare provider might know quite a bit about trials. You could ask a health charity or a patient organization. So just like tonight with Save Your Skin Foundation, there are a number of groups in this space that know quite a bit about trials. You might live close to a hospital or an organization that does research or, an academic center. There are legitimate newspaper ads, TV ads, radio ads. So, you have to watch what you're watching or what you're listening to, but those can be legitimate. And then we've also developed a clinical trial finder that we've got a QR code for. And just like the other information on our website, we worked with patient partners and trial participants to develop that. The clinical trial finder that we've developed will actually look across Canada for you. It will look in different provinces, or it will even look at, you can type in a distance from your home kind of thing. So you can put different sort of parameters around location. At the very least, you need to put in the condition that you're looking for, and it pulls from a fairly large database that's based out of the US, but has many global trials in it. It's kind of like one of the big databases. It's called clinicaltrials.gov, where people register their trials. And it's not a complete listing of trials, but it's a very large listing, and it's one of the largest databases. Our clinical trial finder is just simplified what the interface to that database looks like. So it's quite a bit less intimidating than if you were to go to the original website. So those might be some places you look. Maybe your healthcare provider will actually approach you and ask you if you'd like to participate in a clinical trial. And important for you to understand that you don't have to say yes to that. So you shouldn't feel like you have to say yes because your healthcare provider has come to you with that. And that really shouldn't affect your care if you've decided not to participate in a trial that they have suggested or offered to you. We often get asked about, okay, I think I found a trial and I'm interested in it, but is this legitimate? Is it credible? And these are kind of a few things that should help you with that sort of snuff test. So one thing is that you should not be asked to pay for the therapy that's part of the trial. That should be covered by the trial sponsor. And there should not be an entrance fee or anything wacky like that. You might have to pay some out-of-pocket costs, like maybe parking at the site, maybe you have to take some time off work, those types of costs, but you certainly should not be asked to pay for the actual therapy itself. And I've been asked by people to check out things related to that. And sometimes people are asking for thousands of dollars for the therapy to be paid for. And that should just be an alarming giant red flag for you. Another thing that you should look at are the qualifications of the trial team. So is the study physician or dentist someone who's practiced in that area for a while? Have they published in that area? Are they known as a specialist in that area? Maybe they're affiliated with an academic center, or maybe they're just known for their work in that field. But that's something else you can check out is the trial team. In Canada, all clinical trials that happen have to be reviewed and approved by Health Canada. And if you ask the trial team about that approval, they should be very willing to let you know what that response is. The same goes for clinical trials must be reviewed by and approved by a research ethics board. And a research ethics board is there to look at how the trial is done through an ethical lens and with a mindset around the safety of the participants in the study and the welfare of the participants in the study. So again, that should be a question that any study member team should be able to answer. And, you shouldn't get funny looks for asking that question from them. And then lastly, wherever the trial is hosted, that institution or organization is responsible for that trial legally happening on their premises. And so that's another question about whether it's been reviewed and approved by the institution or organization on whose premises it's taking place. And again, none of these questions should seem out of place if you ask a study team about these items. The next thing is, okay, like I found a trial, I figured out that it meets all of these criteria. That doesn't mean that you can participate in it, unfortunately. Determining if the trial is a good fit for you, you can look at all these top 5 things. The last thing is that you actually have to meet what's called the eligibility criteria to be in the study. And that's kind of like a list of things that you have to sort of have to be able to participate in the study. And so if you contact a study team and you indicate you're interested in a specific study, they would go over the eligibility criteria with you. And that might be, for example, you can't be on a certain type of medication, or you have to be a certain age range. You maybe have to be diagnosed with a certain condition, those types of things. So even if, things check all the boxes for you, you still have to be screened to meet the eligibility requirements of the study as well. Now, the next thing is this is on our website. We've got a whole bunch of different questions that you might ask about a study that you're interested in. And I'll just kind of put them down. We've talked about some of them. There's another slide with some of these as well. But maybe I'll just start with, we talked about you have to make sure you're eligible for the study. So you'd be able to talk to the study team about that. Maybe for you, you're interested in who's funding the study, like is it a company? Is it a not-for-profit organization? You've looked into the study team. Some of the other big things that you might think about is like, what's your kind of time commitment to the study? How's it going to fit into your life, so to speak? So how many visits maybe do you need to make to go to a site, or does does someone from the study team visit you? Can you do some of the tests close to home, like maybe at a private lab, or do you have to go to a study site, and how far is that from where you are? Well, oftentimes you have to fill out a study diary, or maybe there's like a regular survey that you have to fill out about some of what you've experienced, maybe after you've had a treatment. So there's lots of things that you have to think about in terms of your own kind of like commitment to the study. The other thing is you might, what might be important to you is like there could be long-lasting effects from the clinical trial, and some of those things might be related to reproductive risks, et cetera. So, what does that mean for you, and asking some of those questions. So there's a whole nother list of questions too, and I'm happy to share the slides after my talk too. This one is like a lot about how this fits into your life and what's happening in your life. And again, just that whole kind of commitment thing. There's also questions about like, who would you contact if you have any issues or any questions? And that might be different based on kind of the emergency situation of that. And you might ask things about access to the study therapy after the study, if it's been beneficial for you. Will you still have access to it? Because remember that these are experimental medications. And so you may or may not have access to things after the trial. So those might be some things that you think about: how long the trial will be, what your commitment is, what it actually looks like, right? Like in terms of participating, what kind of tests there will be, maybe what kind of surveys or questions you have to answer. And there might be some short-term and long-term follow-up as well. Those might be site visits, they may be tests, they may be surveys, they may be all kinds of different things. So this might be really important to you to get some of these questions answered as well when you're thinking about a particular study. And for some people, having the results of like the whole trial shared with them, not just I know what I went through in the trial, but I'm really interested in overall what the sponsor and what the research team learned, is important for them as well. So there are other options. Like, I'm not here to tell you to participate in a clinical trial, but I'm here asking you to weigh your options carefully. And there are lots of options. Some of them might be better than others. Maybe receiving no treatment is an option. Maybe receiving a different standard treatment is an option. Maybe participating in a different research study. Maybe it's not a clinical trial. Maybe it's some other type of research study, or maybe it's waiting for what you feel is the right clinical trial for you. We've got here, talking to your doctor is important, but so is talking to people in your circle who you trust and who help you make these decisions as well. And if you're interested in a trial, but you can't find one, or you can't find one near you, there are other options too. Like, you could contact the study team. Sometimes people travel to participate in trials, and sometimes the sponsor will pay for that travel. Other people I know have spent their own money to travel, and that's been important for them to participate in a study. There might be ways to advocate and have a study brought to a center that's close to you. That may not be the easiest thing to do, but I also know people who have done that. Or maybe you just want to keep up to date on the research, and maybe there isn't a trial for you right now, or you see it opening someplace else, but maybe in the future it comes a bit closer to you. And I certainly know people in those situations as well. So I'm going to wrap up here. Just wanted to give you a flavor for like, what is this thing we call clinical trials? The fact that you have all kinds of rights related to being a volunteer in a clinical trial, and deciding to participate or deciding to leave or deciding not to participate in the first place. And then there's all kinds of questions that you should think about, and all kinds of possibilities to think about if this is a decision that you feel is right for you. And there's lots of good people who are available to answer any questions you might have about trials as well. So I'll leave it there. I've also left my email address for you here in case you think of some questions afterwards. I'm always happy to jump on an email or have a short call with you if you've got any other questions that you think about.